Welcome, one and all, to the 50th episode of Reanimated. Who knew we would ever make it this far? My name is Stuart Tiffin, and joining me on the East Coast is H.A. Conrad. How are you today, H.A.?
I'm lovely. How are you?
Similarly lovely. Not an adjective I often use to describe myself. However, today, I'll make an exception. So, 50 episodes. Honestly, we should have gotten here a while ago because we were supposed to podcast once a week, and there's 52 something weeks in a year, and so technically we should have gotten here, I don't know,
2 weeks ago.
6 months ago. But hey, we'll take what we can get. So 50th episode, pretty damn exciting. And I think we, after Shaun of the Dead, although it's hard to top that, we've come up with a pretty cool gimmick, if you will, to celebrate our 50th, which is reviewing the Crazies 1973 and 2010 editions. Might be controversial in that neither of them are zombie movies, but as we've established in this podcast, our rubric is quite wide, and these are peripherally still going to work for us.
They're definitely contagion films.
Exactly. And we might have to review the movie Contagion coming
Hmm.
up soon. But
Sure.
before we get into any of that, we can't do any of this without our good old friends there at Squarespace. They are an all-in-one platform, or rather, the all-in-one platform that makes it easy to create your own professional website. And I don't know, if you listen to a lot of podcasts, you probably hear a lot of people talking about Squarespace. That's because they are the podcast center in a way. I mean, they and beyond podcasts though, they just make it really easy to make a website, drag and drop, good support, you name it. Squarespace. And if you're interested in using Squarespace, you can head over to their website and enter the code ZOMBIE, and you'll get 10% off your first purchase.
Yes.
So check that out.
When you said drag and drop, I thought I heard you say drag and drop, and I'm like, drag and drop? What is that? Is that a new feature?
It's like an awesome shot, is what it sounds like. I'll take
Nice.
3 dragon drops. It's like a lemon drop that's on fire, I think, is what I'm picturing.
It's pretty good. Pretty
Yeah.
good.
Um, and so we also have just one or two little tidbits of news to talk about today. It's a very slow zombie news week, which technically is a good thing.
Well, Labor Day weekend, people go away. They don't want to talk about the undead. I
Even
understand that.
even zombies take a break.
Mm-hmm.
But not in the case of another upcoming film that Variety reported just a few days ago that they've started filming, called Generation Z. And this is going to be a film by veteran zombie film directors. What are their names here?
Steve Barker.
Steve Barker, known for the Nazi zombie flicks Outpost and Outpost 2, which I had not heard of, HA, and I think that we should review in due time.
In due time, I had not heard of these either, so maybe we should do that.
Yeah. Um, and so Generation Z is going to be it's set in a world after a zombie apocalypse where humanity has regained the upper hand and are now using zombies for entertainment. I mean, classic hubris mistake. And so it's set on a resort with a Z, spelled with a Z, where you can go on a safari and hunt zombies. And it's kind of reading the synopsis. It reminds me of like Jurassic Park with zombies.
Hmm. Well, and so of course the environmentalists or zombie rights activists get involved and throw a wrench in it, and apparently all mankind is threatened.
Or at least the the
The
actors.
mankind, at least the mankind in the safari part of the park.
Yeah. So, but hey, it's only just started filming. I'm sure we're still a long way away from seeing this, but Generation Z, it's out there, and we'll have to check that out when it comes around.
Right.
And that is literally the only piece of new zombie news that I caught that
All
was
right. Well, and then Z Nation is coming out this fall. Walking Dead, the next season, season 5. Are we on season
good
5?
grief. Yep, season 5.
That premieres in, I think, October.
Yeah.
And so we've got that going on. You've been keeping up with a couple of shows I just haven't unfortunately had the time to see, but The Last Ship and The Strain, which I started to watch and just have fallen far behind. So I
Yeah.
need to
Well,
catch up on those things.
we alluded in an earlier podcast about the premiere of The Strain, for whatever reason, did not really work
Mm,
for either of us.
no.
And I mean, I don't, to this day, I don't think, I haven't rewatched it, but I think that it just, yeah, it fell very flat for some reason. And I think even Guillermo del Toro directed it, and it could have been just like a medium thing, like he wasn't used to TV, or who knows. But that one fell flat. It took a little while for this series to gather steam, but I will say that the last two episodes, from the 31st of August to whatever the one before that, 24th maybe, were dynamite. Like some
Okay.
good twists, some new developments. They're definitely not staying completely true to the book. There are some new characters, and the last episode features just it felt like I was watching a movie, a 45-minute movie, even though like they don't have a lot of different sets. um, it's kind of a really tight little script in one set for this most recent episode on the 31st of August. That it was really cool. It was fun to watch,
All
and so
right.
I would get back on the train, H.A.
All right. I will take your word for it, and I will, in my copious spare time, try to
Yeah,
catch up. But you know what? This is one of those shows that I really need a little binge watching to happen, like a rainy day, and that's what I do with Walking Dead when I'm far behind.
yeah.
So
Well, hopefully you've
I
been
will just.
DVRing it or something. And then otherwise, in other news, the last ship rather, had its 10th and final for the season episode last week, and I was kind of disappointed that it ended that early. Of course, 10 episodes feels like an odd number for a show in the
Yeah,
US TV, but
it
yeah, for whatever
does.
reason, they've been renewed for a second season on TNT, and I'm really psyched for that. There were no real drag episodes. There were no clunkers that I watched this season. It was a good show from start to finish. It's season. And even though there's absolutely no zombies in this, it's just a post-apocalyptic, post-plague, and the season finale left off in a place that is really interesting going forward. I'm not sure what the ship is going to have to do with it necessarily, but it
But it
looks
leaves the characters in a good place.
an interesting place, maybe not a
Okay.
good place.
Well, I
Yeah.
mean a good place to start up again next
Yeah,
season.
exactly. A good storytelling place. So that's another show that I was excited for once I found out about it, and it didn't disappoint. It was just like the first episode, I was convinced that they wouldn't have the budget because they use so much footage of a destroyer that, and they managed to keep going with that. It was really surprising. They have this crazy access to a Navy warship that I wouldn't expect from a TV show, but it is Michael Bay behind the scenes, so who knows what strings he's pulling. And he's a great friend to the U.S. military and has features them and features all the branches and just all the Transformers movies and just about everything he does.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does indeed. Speaking of which, he had a pretty good season this summer with Transformers. It did very well, even though I did not go see it.
I did. I'm kind of ashamed to say
What?
it was bad, but you know what's done better? What's done better than every movie so far this year was Guardians of the Galaxy,
That's true.
and so mo power to comics.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
It's really the summer of Rocket and Groot. It might be the summer of Groot, actually.
I think it's a summer of Groot and Baby Groot dancing tree
Yep.
toys.
Yep.
So,
But
yeah.
yeah, so other than that, also True Blood ended. It had its series finale this summer, and I have not watched much of the last few seasons.
I
But
watched the first two seasons and then I decided to stop. And from what I understand, that was a good decision. Did you watch beyond that?
yeah, I've seen. I don't think I've watched every episode, but I've seen. I tried to keep up with at least the general storyline. It's a show that entertained me.
It's popcorn.
Yeah, and there are some characters and some actors I've discovered through that show that I really enjoy, and I would look forward to seeing them do other things for sure.
Which actors?
I don't know the name of the actor, but the guy who plays Jason Stackhouse I think is hilarious.
Oh yeah, he's a good character.
He's a goofy, like in the show he plays the brother of the heroine, and he's just a dumbass. And
I
but
know
he's got great comic timing, and I think that it'll be fun to watch him do some other stuff.
cool. All right.
Anyway, so that show's over. It's happy and sad.
No more Suki.
No more Sookie Stackhouse.
Hmm. Yeah, it's I think it's fitting though, like for our 50th episode that we did something bigger than usual, and I liked what we did this week in terms of what we decided to review.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit off the beaten path. A lot of people have never heard of the fact that John Romero wrote, or sorry, he didn't write it, but well, he did. He rewrote it.
George Romero.
What did I call him? Jordan?
John. John.
John Romero. John Romero is a video game maker.
John, we call him John when we're close, right?
God damn it,
All good.
George Romero. So a lot of people don't know that George Romero even had this film, made this film. I mean, probably the 2010 remake was what reminded a lot of people that he did, and it was a commercial flop.
Well, I mean, it was a tiny release and really not in normal places. Like, if you say limited release, I would even argue it was barely released.
It was in Times
Um,
Square, I think.
but but that was like it. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't really. I don't think it had a chance to be big, but I think he had already had a couple of flops anyway, so maybe that's why they didn't want to do it. And so anyway, yeah, and you pointed out that it nearly bankrupted him.
This was his fourth film total. Like his first film ever was Night of the Living Dead, which was critical and I assume box office success. Followed by There's Always Vanilla, and what was the other one? Oh, The Season of the Witch, which I mean, I guess one of them he had issues with the writer and didn't do a very good job. And the thing is, the Crazies, 1973, they had a budget of 250-ish thousand dollars. It was the biggest budget film he'd ever for a film that he'd ever had. But it just didn't pay off, and it I don't know. I mean, not to dive right in with negativity, but it feels pretty
Hmm.
damn cheap, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, but it also feels a bit Romero. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
So,
it feels completely Romero. Yeah, absolutely. So the original name for the script was The Mad People.
so they were like, let's kick it up a notch and call it the Crazies.
I'm
Um,
so glad that they did.
I am
Yeah.
too. The bad people.
And yeah, so should we talk about what we liked about the 1973 version of the Crazies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's Romero trying to make the point he often does politically, and this is one of those points. This is, um, you know, this is definitely there, and he does the whole thing where he kind of knocks you over the head with the whatever political idea he is having at the time. So is this Vietnam, correct? Post Vietnam. So he has the army playing a pretty big role here, not like Michael Bay does in this case.
No, not so much
Um,
a celebratory role for the
no, but
military.
you definitely feel it's I think it's the thing I kind of liked is that you initially think that it's the army that is the problem here and that they are the enemy. And the virus is certainly one of the cast of characters here. It's pretty clear that the army is trying to cover up and contain, and they go through many lengths to do this. And pretty early on, you get that sense, like they're costumed in these crazy hazmat suits. They really don't care about the people, other than the fact that they're trying to contain them. Um, and it's interesting how they reveal all this, and they're revealing it through mainly the stories of Judy, who is a nurse, and David, who is a volunteer firefighter, and with his bestie Crank.
Clank.
Clank, sorry.
It's
Crank.
okay. It's
He
okay.
seems kind of
He's a crank. He is
cranky.
a crank. He's a crank.
And and so you kind of see how they reveal how they're seeing the how the virus is evolving in this town. It's, the opener of it is you don't really know what's going on. It's kind of this crazy, what seems like a crazy drunken father going on a rampage and tries to burn his house down. And these kids, his kids, see him doing this. But it's not really that scary. It's, you know what I mean? Like there isn't. I didn't feel like there was like a sense of horror about it, but it was an interesting unfolding of events. And very Romero in the pacing. So I like some of the things about it. You know, in terms of that kind of thing, I think that there were some really interesting moments in terms of how the army was dealing with it in their conversations. There was a super weird scene with the powers that be are deciding what is going to happen here if they can't contain it, and they sort of chat a little bit about making it look like it was an accidental and there was some sort of warhead or something that then accidentally goes off, which is basically meant to contain it. But during the course of this conversation, they're talking to the president, and the president won't look at them. It's just like the weird bald spot on his head.
It's kind of like talking to your grandparents on Skype, where they don't know where the camera is and they
Yeah,
can't.
it's like
Yeah,
there's some weird things like that I know I just were super strange and weird, and I kind of liked it about this.
and a little bit of trivia, H.A. That is actually George Romero's head.
I figured it probably was, but it was just the weirdest scene. Um, to sort of unveil that,
Yeah.
and the president is smoking, and or George Romero is smoking, so there's that. I think that there were interesting dynamics between some of the characters. There, and they weren't afraid to do really super creepy things, and sometimes I wish they wouldn't do those, like the character that actually appears in both films. She plays this
Lynn
kind of
Lowry.
yeah, she plays this kind of weird, crazy teenage girl in this that ends up getting raped by her father because that's how crazy he is. And then she makes a little cameo appearance in the new one. Equally creepy though, riding around on her bike and being strange.
It's
But
not, it's not that creepy. I mean, it's unsettling. I
all
would say.
right, not as creepy, but still, it's a little weird.
I
But
was I was happy to see her make that cameo. That was cool.
it was very cool seeing her because
She's a very memorable character from the first film. I mean,
she
say what
is.
you will about all the nasty shit that the very nasty shit that happens to her and her, her demise. She's a very memorable and well done
Well,
character.
and that storyline actually gets the point across, like how not with it these people are, how outside of themselves they are, like how much they're being affected. She's also a very distinctive looking person, so it's just kind of she's an interesting character to have there. um so there were things that I liked about it. I definitely think that it could have used some editing, and it definitely did not have to be as long as it was. um
Are you going into negatives already?
No, but I'm saying, these are things where I watched this and I had seen this. I feel like I had seen this on some bad, like, horror marathon, something a few years ago. And then I obviously saw the 2010 remake in 2010. But even watching this, I was remembering some of the things that they did with the 2010 and being like, oh, I see why they did that. So I also see why this was not as commercially successful. There really aren't zombies. There really isn't, the effects are very cheap. Um, but some of the characters are compelling. The story could be compelling, but it's just not, it just feels a little bit wandering and not all that scary. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, as far as things that I liked about it, I enjoyed the dual perspective element to it because it showed this one issue, and as you said, like the virus is a character because they actually gave it a freaking human name in both
Well,
in
yeah.
both versions of the movie. It's Trixie is the virus, and you see how the military is trying to tackle it, and it's a with with the exception of all the soldiers doing petty larceny all over town, they are empathetic. They're kind of sympathetic characters, up to including the guy who's in charge of the operation. You feel legitimately bad for him at the end at the end of this film. Like he's not a monster. He's not a tyrant, and I like the fact that they treated both sides of the story equally, and that was to me that was interesting. I really liked Richard France, who
Yeah,
plays Dr. Watts.
he
Yeah,
was great.
mostly because I recognized him from his TV appearances in Dawn of the Dead, where he's
Mm,
eye patch TV guy,
guy.
and it was like, oh, it's him, it's eye patch
It's
TV guy.
iPad TV guy. Yay. Yes.
And you know the fact that he was actually what is missing from the 2010 version that's in this version is they're looking for a cure. They're like trying to solve this problem, and you get to see that the government is trying to do something to help, and that's actually missing from the 2010 version. And I understand that like there's kind of different approaches, and obviously it's super apparent that these are very different approaches to the story. But at least in the 73 version, you get to see that the government isn't necessarily even coming out of Vietnam and all of this distrust of government. They're not as evil as they are in 2010, which is came into fruition under the Bush administration. You've got two wars that we're embroiled
Right.
in. It's somehow less cynical about the balance of power and government in the 1973 version, which is for Romero amazing. Maybe he just hadn't come into his total, you
Well,
know.
I mean, there's definitely, I mean, as you pointed out, there are certain characters within the armed forces that he paints sympathetically. But as you get higher up into the brass, those aren't quite as sympathetic characters.
Well, yeah, I mean, those are
You
like the
know what I mean?
civilian, like the way up at the top guys who are just
Yeah.
calling and Romero actually this is kind of a deft touch where he's like he has them on speakerphone and they don't know what Colonel Peckham's name is and they're like, "What's his name?" And he can
Mm-hmm.
hear them saying like, "Oh, his name's Chris. Okay, call him Chris." And so they're like, "Chris, how are you going to handle the situation?" He obviously and with just a couple lines in the script paints them as buffoons and disaffected and basically not really handling the situation very well. Colonel Peckham, however, as the guy on the scene, the commander on the scene, is handling things like a boss.
Well,
Like he's
right.
commandeering civilian aircraft. He's getting upset when unnecessary civilian deaths are happening, and they happen like right in front of him. It's to me like I like the fact that you got a double-sided story here, and I guess, but I'm talking a lot about that because there aren't a lot of other things that I like about this movie.
Right.
The list of things I don't like is much longer. Um,
Yeah, and we'll get to those definitely. Um, and then in terms of the 2010 version, I think seeing the base, and I was glad that we watched these back to back. I think it was a good comparison. Um, I really there was the storytelling I think in 2010 was a lot tighter and a lot more dramatic in terms of sort of hitting home what is actually going on. Um, it's definitely in terms of the characters in the 73 version don't really know each other. They're encountering people that they don't know. It's generally, there's a couple of characters like the Clank and David and Judy that obviously know each other, but people that they encounter, they generally don't know.
and it's a
Um,
town of 3,000. They,
right.
they
So,
talk
which
about that a
is,
bunch of times. So you're like, why wouldn't you know, at least by face, everybody in your community?
well, and, it is a little strange because she's a nurse in the local doctor's office. He's a volunteer fireman. So obviously, there's a lot of community stuff that these two would actually be more exposed to in terms of getting to know people in the community. So that to me made so much more sense how they handled it in the 2010 version, which is, and Judy gets upgraded to a doctor in this version, and David is a sheriff. But they know everybody in the community. It's much more personal. It's much more, this is affecting my community. And you would understand why they would care other than to save their own skins. They really do care about the fact that these are people that they generally are dealing with every day. So I thought that that was a very smart thing to do with it. I felt like the storytelling was a little, it was just a lot tighter. And I thought that they did a pretty good job editing and they made it a lot more, in terms of being a horror film. The effects were a bit better. They had the element of suspense, even, they emulated a couple of the scenes closely, like the fire burning the house down scene. that was totally creepy, compared to the Romero version, which I feel was kind of like weird but not really creepy. Um, I think they were trying to paint it creepy, but it wasn't. You get all the build up to that. This guy who's a little bit catatonic suddenly goes after his wife and his children, and it is terrifying, and you feel that terror a lot more than I think you did in the Romero version. Um, and you're right. I do think that the armed forces feel a little bit more evil here, but they also feel a little bit more Big Brother here. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, because they're you never get to know their side of the story,
Right.
except
You
for that
don't.
one
It's
guy. Except for
the
that
one
one
guy.
guy.
And then there's all the weird little sort of surveillance pieces that come in and out, which is, I think, the different perspective of that. And I thought that was an interesting piece to add. I don't know that I liked it more, but I thought it was an interesting way to move along what the plot or like give information in a very quick way. The
Hmm.
fact that they're being observed and the fact that they're monitoring the situation in this town. Um, and I just it was a fun ride. I don't think it was as it was definitely, and then the special effects. Like I think that the people who were infected with this looked very dramatic when they were infected further on in the process. Like initially, there's not much to tell, but they they start to get darkened under the eyes. When it's really progressed, they look pretty bizarre. They've got like veins popping out. They're like they're super creepy looking and they're acting irrationally, so it's even more scary. But I don't know, like it is successful and I do like it, but I don't know, I also felt like it was a little creepy in the other one that you almost couldn't tell who was infected. I don't know, I'm sort of, it's a toss up for me on that one.
I really enjoyed. Well, it was night and day. Like as you mentioned, the suspense. It was almost like after the first scene of this film, the moments where you're not kind of like expecting something to jump out at the screen are really few and far between. It's
Right,
like
and
right
it's
after one guy has jumped out and been killed, you have like 10 seconds to regather your thoughts before the next time you're expecting someone to jump out and go after you.
well, and one of the things I thought they did very successfully, and I felt it very much when they have the coroner
Yeah.
attack the David character, the sheriff character. Um, because this is a character that you've seen totally rational, totally mellow and laid back and just very just normal guy that he interacts with suddenly turn into like a terrible mess and like he's going after him with a freaking bone saw. Um and that just really, to me, there was all these moments like that throughout the film that really kept you on the edge of your seat.
Otherwise, you mentioned that the effects were better and they're like night and day again. It's the military are have like good costumes as we kind of have come to expect. Basically, this film was made with almost 10 times the budget,
Well, I was
and
gonna
it
say
shows
it
that like
shows.
they've got access to the kinds of things that Romero couldn't even dream about. And this is before Romero had Savini on his team or any of these guys too. But whereas 1973 has all the military wearing white biohazard suits that don't really even fit. Like you can see skin,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they're not wearing gloves and they just have like bare hands. You're like, all right, what's the point of wearing your suit if you have bare hands or I can see your neck through your suit? Whereas in this film, the military are in either like kind of weird futuristic NBC suits or like biohazard suits, or
Yeah.
they're in like really creepy combat gear wearing gas masks.
Right.
And
And that's the thing,
we've
though.
got a
It's
great
like,
cast also in the new film. We've got Olifant. I don't know.
hmm
We've got Rhoda Mitchell, who I first saw in Pitch Black, and she plays a real gutsy kind of ass kicker in Pitch Black. Her character's a little bit lackluster, honestly, in this film. Um, the guy who plays Russell Clank is really good, Joe Anderson, and Glenn Morshower is this character actor who's in a lot of TV shows. He was in 24 playing a Secret Service agent. It's like this redhead middle-aged guy, and he comes out of he's like this weird government agent who's been taking pictures of stuff and driving around in an
Yep.
SUV in the 2010 version. Like his role is not really necessary to the film, but whatever. He shows up, and I was like, oh, I know that guy, and then he died.
Yeah.
But it's a really good cast. However, I should throw out as an aside, Kevin Smith ruined Timothy Olyphant for me.
What? Did you what? Did
Yeah,
you
of
listen to
course. I
it?
watched it, and like he basically makes him out to sound like a total dickhead and a bully, and it's just like, oh, okay, great. Well, now next season of Justified, I'm not going to be able to watch it with my usual glee.
Aw. Um, well, and then Joe Anderson, did you ever see him in he's been in a few different things too.
What has he been in?
He was in the uh the
This is
Divide.
the guy who played Russell Clank. He was in wait, The
The jo-
Divide,
yeah,
the
it's
one
like a
about the people stuck
series.
in the basement.
It's a legal drama.
Oh no, then not that one.
Not about people stuck in the basement at
It's a
all.
great movie. It's a post-apocalyptic film, I
But
think.
he's been in some he's also been in a lot of like like across the universe, which is more of like a romance, and he's been in stuff like that. So I'm kind of wondering what's going to happen because he is supposed to be in Horns,
What's that?
which is Horns is the book that Joe Hill, who is Stephen King's son, wrote. And so it was, and this is a film based on the book. And so he is supposed to be in there, um, possibly. So we shall see. So he's been doing some work. I'm glad to see he's still busy.
All right. Well, cool.
But so there's a good cast in here, and I don't. Yes, you see some repeats in the '73 version in other Romero films, but I don't think you really see the talent that you're seeing in this cast.
Oh, you know who you see? The guy who plays Kathy's father, Artie, uh, who
Oh yeah,
plays.
he's in.
He's Dr. Frankenstein in Day of the Dead,
Yeah, yeah.
which is I did not realize that until I read about it because he looks very different.
He looks very different, but yes, he is. He's appearing again for Romero. But as you mentioned, the budget is definitely very different. But I just also feel like there's a way to do that without the budget, and Romero has done that before, and it felt almost like he got lazy in this. And so I just think that this was very much the remake was a good idea in the way that they handled it. So
It's such an interesting thing that they actually remade this movie because based on the original, like other than the premise, which is interesting, why? I mean, it's kind of like Andromeda Strain.
why would
Uh,
you want to remake it? I mean, you
yeah,
know what? I think Breck Eisner just was. My feeling is that I don't know if for sure, and I think there's probably interviews with him talking about it a little bit, but you know, there's been a lot of remakes of different things. This was sort of obscure, and I think if you watched this, you can almost see how it could be made better, and I think that's what he did. And he took elements that probably didn't make sense to him and made it fit into his new storyline.
yeah. So he was brought on board by the producers who had like acquired the rights and a script, and then took that script, which the scripts for the remake, the original script, for the remake, also had that split point of view between the military and the townsfolk. And he decided that he didn't want the military point of view, and you're saying I think that you prefer it that way, and I'm not sure. I would have liked to have seen it.
It's not that I prefer it that way. I think with the story that he was trying to tell, it didn't make sense and he told it in other ways. So he basically tweaked the narrative.
Yeah,
The two point of view is I did like it in the '73 version, and I think that would have been a little bit more interesting, but it's also what added on the enormous amount of time into the film. So,
true.
and I also think that he went a little bit further. They actually show the remains of, they actually show the guy that crashed into the water supply in the 2010 remake. You don't actually really see that in the '73. They talk about it, but you don't really see it close up.
Yeah.
So it's I think he just goes in a little bit of a different direction, and he's giving more time, I think, to the virus than to the military. So
Yeah,
that's
and and if we can go into some negatives, I feel like that is one of the biggest drawbacks or faults of the original film is that the virus, other than our little posse of David and Judy and Clank and Artie and Kathy, we don't really get to see much of the virus. I mean, we
no,
kind of do. There's like a whole gymnasium full of hooping and hollering idiots because in that film, in the 73 version, people with the virus don't all act the same. In 2010, they all become psychopathic killers.
mm-hmm.
In 73, some of them just act stoned.
Yep.
And
Or some
like
of them just die flat out. So it's pretty, you know.
yeah, so and there isn't enough of people being crazy. The name of the movie is The Crazies, and part of this subplot, part of this what we're supposed to be taking away is that the non-sick people trying to deal with this catastrophe are sometimes acting just as crazy as the crazies, and
Well,
that's like the oh my goodness, who's crazy now? And that's part of the dramatic tension. As oh,
but
are they sick because they're acting irrational? But that's because they're dealing with an incredible situation. There's just not enough craziness in the
well,
original version.
and the other name for this film was supposed to be codenamed Trixie. I guess
Yeah.
you sometimes saw it packaged as that. So I'd agree with you. If you're supposed to have this movie that's supposed to be about this other character, i.e., the virus, um, I think you need to make more effort to define that and to have the characters or to show why it's so scary. It's scary, I guess, but it doesn't feel as scary as it does to me in the 2010 version. And I mean, in the 2010 version, even if you look at what the makeup artists were doing, they were looking at very specific diseases to come up with those makeup effects. So they had a very good idea about what they were trying to portray.
Yeah, and it all had to be derivative of an actual disease.
Right. And they had different stages, and so obviously the last stage they're the scariest looking, and that's when you get that really dramatic look with the veins and everything like that. But
Apparently, the makeup for those final stages, I'll call them zombies just for expedience sake. It took 3 hours for makeup, and then the contact lenses you had to spritz them in the eye with some drops every 5 minutes, which I cannot imagine how long it must have taken to shoot the garage scenes in the quick fill.
oh, I know. Um, so so I think that they did a good job of updating it and updating it sensibly. But yeah, I hear you. I think that the crazies really needed much more of some more defined way of why these people, like why this virus was so scary, because it doesn't. I watched this really kind of like, okay, whatever. I don't think I felt any real suspense. I don't think I felt any real,
It's no
like,
horror. It's not
I
even a
didn't
horror movie.
jump. I didn't jump at all. I didn't even really. I was like, okay, well that's over. And then when I dived into, I was like diving into this one right away, and immediately I like there was just, it was freaking terrifying moments, and it continued pretty much throughout the film. And there's really scary things. You can put yourself into the shoes of these people. I think it's because they make it so. And if you notice the way that it's filmed, super close up a lot of the time, you really feel that anxiety. They're doing some very clever things with the camera in terms of that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Very smart filmmaking on that end. And they even made it look very gritty. They filmed this with 35 millimeter, I think they were saying,
yeah.
to give it that kind of look. And it really shows that they were going for a very certain effect and a reaction from the audience, and I think they got it. So
So my other biggest complaint about 73 is the sound, which is just it
all over
it
the place.
it's well, a lot of the looping for well, honestly, it goes back to like how this movie feels, which it kind of feels like George Romero had a bunch of footage and just threw it all at a wall and saw and like just to see what sticks. And
Mm-hmm.
it feels like so much of the dialogue is just people yelling at each other and then running around, and there's scenes of chaos, which I guess is all supposed to convey that there's craziness happening. But at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, you lose so much of the direction of the story It's only because of a few of the actors or characters in the film that you are able to retain any kind of idea of what's going on a lot of the time. And then the sound on top of that, it actually was recorded in a basement, and it sounds
It
like it was recorded in a gym or something. They're so
it
echoey.
it's so echoey. It also doesn't always match up. If you notice, the syncing is off
Yeah,
sometimes. It very much reminds me. Have you ever seen American Werewolf in London?
of course.
When he's in like the porno theater and
Yeah.
it's like and it really reminds me of the sound in that. Um, and sometimes the quality reminds me a little bit of that.
No, it's god awful.
Yeah, and it does, and it's so that honestly, when I was starting to watch the remake, it was such a relief to have the sound be so much better.
No, the fidelity is great. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, okay, so Romero, you made this terrible mistake of having a lot of soldiers in your film wearing gas masks and then expecting them to have lines. Uh, because some of them are delivered, as they were spoken through the gas mask and recorded, and that's how they ended up in the film. And it sounds like they're talking through a rubber mask, which is to say almost completely unintelligible. And then
Hmm.
other guys, apparently, he had them either not saying anything or decided to loop over what they were saying and doing so in an echoey room with no gas mask on.
Hmm.
The result is kind of as you might expect it. It's just terrible.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound they sound nothing alike the rest of their friends who were, obviously it's a disaster. So some filmmaker friends of mine have told me in the past, like, yeah, people are willing to look past shoddy filmmaking, but they are not. They are less willing to deal with bad sound. Sound is one of those things that it'll hit a nerve, and you will not be able to get past it. And for me, I definitely was feeling that watching the '73. It's
I was
just
feeling that as well. And, I was talking to a friend of mine about just zombie films and just saying, look, there is an acceptable level of cheesiness and there's tons of like B zombie movies out there and that's okay too. But there is, even watching The Battery and they even talk about the point where they have problems with their sound in that extras clip.
mhm.
And I know exactly where they were talking about. You know what I mean? Like it's something that takes you out of the experience of watching the film.
Yeah,
So it's super important to be consistent with it. And it felt I had to actually turn up the volume a few times and then turn it back down again because it was never consistent, at least on what I was watching, which was from iTunes. Um, and it was just um, really disconcerting and a relief to watch a film that the sound was not subpar.
yeah. And then just actual video edits were also going
Well,
like a
those.
mile a minute, because this has been attributed to the fact that Romero and his production company, or the studio that he was working at, the group of guys that put this film together, they were doing commercials to keep the lights on basically in between movies. And some people have suggested that the reason why there is a cut every second, is because of all that commercial shooting that they were doing. And I think that this is best illustrated when Colonel Peckham is packing his suitcase, but when he's like on the phone with
Uh-huh.
Washington, they're like, "You're going to Trixieville or whatever it's called," and it's like shot of his underwear in the drawer, shot of his
Hmm.
socks landing in the suitcase, shot of his, just going back and forth from the suitcase to the drawer. I'm like, why do I need to watch this
I know, it was
underwear in the?
super strange.
It was really weird. But it was just like, wow, I feel like I'm on a tour of this man's undergarments right now. Uh, yeah, while I'm listening to him on the phone, and it just didn't make any
They
sense.
wanted you to know he wore tidy whities. I don't know.
It was bizarre. The racial component was pretty noticeable again, or more noticeable in this
In
one. Like
this, yeah.
when Peckham takes off his hood when he shows up, and they're like, "Oh, thank God, finally a colonel is here," and then he takes off his biohazard hood, and they're like, "Oh, what the heck?"
Yeah, I know.
That was, I mean, like that was another thing that made the army seem more cosmopolitan, and like they were more liberal than
Hmm.
the townies, from Crazyville. It was kind of interesting. But things I don't like. What else? What else? There was just so much fucking the scene where Clank is in the woods having his final standoff with the army,
Oh
and he
God.
kills like 100 guys by himself.
I know. I was just like, are you kidding me? No way. Not going to happen.
That
Wait,
was
you like that or you didn't
no,
like
no, I
that?
did not like that. That
Okay.
was bananas. That was bananas, and he's just like muttering to himself the whole time. I don't know. Yeah, the movie is like as you've mentioned. At this point, you've been watching it for like 2 hours, and you're like, can this be over yet?
Right. Did you make Holly watch this with you?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, I didn't make Bill watch it either. Um, he wouldn't, and I think that there's interesting things. I do agree with you though. The fact that they were trying to actually find a cure was the key piece that was missing from the remake. Um, and then in terms of, and obviously we're spoiling the heck out of this, so I guess we should have said that. Um, but they talk about blowing up the town and basically destroying everybody, and we have seen this in many different films of this nature where they threaten it or whatever. In the remake, they actually do blow up the town.
Why
So
not? I mean, who's even left?
right,
At least in
um,
the 73 version, they give a tally at the end. They're like, so
right.
2,000 people are still alive, if you can call it that, and then they're all just loonies in the gym.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I don't think anybody's left alive in Ogden Marsh in the 2010 version.
No, it doesn't appear to be. And they also had the little sneaky thing in the Romero film where David actually is immune to it. But it's never. They're all like, "Pshaw, we're not going to even test him." So there's that silly little added thing.
Well, I felt like that had some. That was a moment where he's like
Mm-hmm.
walking past Peckham, and they like kind of look at each other, and they're like, "If only we could find the immunity." And he's like,
Right.
"Yeah, well." But yeah, another thing that I don't really get from the 73 version is why. I get it that Judy and David want to get away from everybody else so that they don't get sick, but why do they have to like try and bust through the quarantine?
I don't know. It's super strange. Um, I don't really. That piece was very odd. That's what I mean about like the storytelling here. They're kind of all they're rambling around. They're trying to get out. They're trying to get out, but it's never fully explained why.
Like they go to the country club and then they leave the country club and go to
Right.
that other house and then they're there for a little while. I feel like did the army even ever find them at the country club?
No, I don't think so. So
They just decided to leave.
right. So there's always this sort of shambling about. I mean, I really understand why the David and Judy of the remake are trying to get the heck out. It's
And
pretty
it
clear.
becomes even clearer after they find out what's been going on with the so-called uninfected humans or people.
Right.
You're like, oh, good choice. And actually, that was one of my favorite lines from the 2010 version is when David is talking to the city planner, and I forget that character's name. He's just like, so I'm going back once they get taken out to the Quickville near the, at the third of the way through the film. And he's like, this is our only chance to get out of here. Why would you go back? It's like, tell you what, man, I won't ask you, or you don't ask me why I'm willing to go back for my wife. And I promise I won't ask you why you're not.
Mm-hmm.
I like that line. I don't know.
Yep.
It was good. Um, Another thing, it was very apparent that 73 version was not made with access to the internet because as we've said, the Breck Eisner version they were looking at real diseases and trying to emulate that in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the look and feel of Trixie on people. And in 73 they also were like containing they were testing people to see if they had it and then isolating them. There was a lot of quarantine going on. Whereas in the 73, they were like, everybody in town, I don't care if you're sick or not, you're all getting thrown into one room together.
Yep.
And then we're going to take the only doctor that we have who knows anything about the disease, and we're going to put him in the same building as all
With
the sick
you.
people.
Yep. Because that's a smart way to go.
And then that doctor, who's very well educated and knows a lot about the disease, is going to decide to take off his protective gear, uh,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately resulting in him being mistaken for a sick person
Yes.
and then accidentally being killed in like a
Yes.
stampede of crazies. So I don't know if they were just trying to make a point about how the military doesn't know what they're doing and what a bunch of idiots, but it sure seemed like that seemed like a terrible way to try and even deal with this problem.
Yeah, I think it was just a terrible way to drive along the plot, which also didn't make any sense. I understood where the plot was going and why in the remake, so I feel like they were much more successful in that storytelling. Um, they did a lot of things that didn't make sense in the 73 version.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's you know what was I was thinking while watching it though, even when they were talking about Trixie, I was actually wondering if Stephen King had seen this because The Stand came out, I think, in 78.
Is that disease called Trixie?
No, but it's called Colonel Trips.
Colonel Trips, that's right.
And so just even that whole idea, like, I could imagine that it could have been like the idea, which I guess you have a lot of that stuff going on, but just even the military being involved and whatever, like, I'm wondering if you look back and see if he was influenced by that, whether he had seen this before he was writing it. It'd be interesting.
Yeah. I like
Um,
giving the human name in both of those cases. I think that's really kind of a cool. Nowadays, obviously we give things like designations like SARS and swine flu, and they don't get
right?
they don't get people names.
So,
Interesting sub story tangent from that Breck Eisner interview that I'm gonna link to. There's a on Den of Geek is a Breck Eisner interview where he talks about how Oliphant's family had come out to the set in Iowa where they were shooting, or was it Georgia? They were shooting in Georgia and Iowa, I think. And when they were trying to fly back to wherever they were coming from, his Oliphant's son and daughter had a cold, and they were shooting this at the time of the swine flu outbreak, and they were not allowed. They were kicked off their plane, and not allowed to
oh
continue
no.
because they had a cold and they were coming from an area where swine flu was a problem, which was for the cast and crew kind of like
A little disturbing, I would
yeah,
imagine.
while they're in the middle of shooting this film about a pandemic, and well, obviously an extreme case of that, they had this kind of stuff going on nearby, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Um, and actually, I really did love Mr. Oliphant in this. I think he did a very good job. Um, what? Now
Not
you think he's a total jerk, so you
sure
don't
he
like
did a
him
great
anymore?
job, but he's like the best actor who ever lived. Such a cool guy.
Oh, fantastic. Um, no, I think he did a very good job in terms of his reactions, his interactions with the other people. There is the really disturbing scene where the initial person that he shoots is this town god. He's somebody that had had a problem with alcohol, and so that's what everybody initially thinks it is. But he has to talk to the guy's son and wife about it, and later on really interacts with them, and they are totally infected, and you can totally see his reaction and what he does based upon what he had done initially with that character. And it's he did a very good job at playing, not playing dumb, I guess, but in figuring out the story for himself, I guess, and driving things along. Didn't you feel that to be the case?
Run that
Where
by me again, like his character.
no, he as an actor, I think, did a great job at basically he's the person that's revealing everything to the audience.
Yeah,
Um, and
it's
I
his
felt
it's his story for sure because
it's
he's
his story, and he did a great job. You understand his motivation for things, whereas I feel like in the 73 version, David and Judy are just kind of running around for no purpose. I don't really understand their motivation for anything other than to get out or
and
stay
there's
away
some
from people. So I feel like the way that he sort of dealt with this character was a lot smarter than
yeah.
the David of 73.
Well, the 73 David is all also like, former Green Beret filled with all this guilt about the war and kind of like, like when he's throwing his rifle away at the end of
Right.
the movie, he's just so sick of violence and he like the insanity of it all just to drive that nail back, into the coffin of the subtext. Whereas this guy, he's just all about saving his wife and saving his family, and there's less complexity to his tale. I mean,
Yeah.
he's kind of concerned with saving his townspeople, but not really. It's
Right.
because there's like nothing he can do for the most part.
Right.
Were there
So
things that you didn't like about the 2010 version?
I think sometimes it's almost like, well, so that same thing that we were talking about, the suspense and getting like kind of scared. Sometimes it was a little bit overkill,
It was
I think.
nonstop, is what I would thought.
Like, and I don't think that you need all of that to drive it. I think that they were very much going for the horror genre, and that's what they were going for, and I get that. But I think that part of what makes that work sometimes is that suspense and building that suspense. And if you have like scene after scene after scene of people jumping out and attacking, then that doesn't work as much. I don't know. So I feel like they could have done a little better on that. Um, you know, there's definitely not a. This is a pretty dark film in terms of the ending, I feel.
You think?
So it's definitely, and I don't know. I think 28 Days Later, when you see that they're rescued, they had tried an alternate ending where they actually don't get rescued, like where they're actually going to be attacked or die or whatever, and the test audience was just so appalled by it that they decided to change it, I think. So I felt like here they were like, we don't even care. We're just going to depress everybody.
Well, it's the same kind of ending in both stories. Like
It is,
the
but
virus has spread into a
yeah,
much larger population. In
yeah,
the first movie, it's the Louisville. In the second movie, it's the Cedar Rapids. And in both versions, you see the government taking its containment and just shifting it from this small community now to the larger one. And so it's almost like, well, in a way, you could say it's setting it up for a sequel, but more like I think it's just saying,
it's
yeah,
hopeless.
it's hopeless,
You're
it's all
done.
over.
You're
But
done.
could they have called it the Crazies if they'd been like, and then everybody, all the crazy people were cured or killed, and everybody lives happily ever after? I don't think that would be a compelling story. It's
You're
much more
probably
interesting
right.
to look at it as being this like out of control thing that, despite these draconian measures the military is taking, it's still outsmarting or beating them.
Oh, I agree with you. Maybe I was just in the mood for something a little more hopeful this weekend. That's all.
That's not this podcast.
Yes, yes, yes.
We don't do
I
happy
know. We don't
endings.
do happy endings. We don't. We don't. Except with Shaun of the Dead.
Yes, and that was only so. Um,
Well,
Thing that I had some trouble with while I was watching the 2010 version, but then I've since kind of come to terms with it, was there are these groups of infected people. Like, you get the impression from the infected that they go completely bananas and then just try to kill everybody around them, right? That's
hmm
kind of the idea you get.
yeah,
However, there are some groups that continue to work together, like the
right.
mother son,
Combo.
Rory's mother son, and then the hunters.
hmm
And there's two baseball player teenagers or something at one point who are just both punching a dumpster together, but not each other. I just didn't really understand why it wasn't treating everybody the same way. But then I thought, like Clank, while he does get all paranoid and hold David and Judy at gunpoint, I don't know if he does it in the 73, but in the 2010 he definitely does.
Yep.
Eventually though, he's like, I'm sick, and makes this noble sacrifice,
Yeah.
because ultimately he chooses that association over, like, he beats the disease in a way. And definitely in the 73 version it's a similar sort of
Similar theme.
ending for Clank. He chooses loyalty to his friends over the insanity. Like, he beats it in a way.
Yeah. Um.
So I kind of talked myself out of my argument, like, why are some people killing everyone, and some people are only killing people they're not friends with? And it made me think that maybe the principal of the school had no friends, or I don't know, like, why he wants to kill everybody he meets.
Well, it's because he had to give. He couldn't get let out of his parking tickets. He was upset about that from the very beginning of the film.
Gotta get, yeah, not willing to give away the free coffee if he wasn't gonna get
Yes, because
tickets.
coffee at kids' baseball games super delicious.
Oh yeah. So anyway, did you have any other negative feedback about 2010?
No, I mean that was my biggest thing is that I feel like I think I noticed the same thing you did, and I wondered if there was some edited scene that explained why some of them worked together and some of them didn't, and why some of them were just totally homicidal practically immediately. Um, it didn't make total sense to me. So I feel like something must have ended up on the editing room floor to explain that piece. Maybe I'm
Maybe.
wrong. So I did notice that it didn't bother me totally, but it did niggle a little bit at the back of my mind. My biggest thing was that I think they could have sacrificed a few of the gory scenes to, I don't know, do a little bit more character development or give a little more information, perhaps like about something like that.
Hmm.
But I mean, I had fun watching it, and maybe it was because I was comparing them side by side. It was to me a relief to watch the remake.
Yeah.
If that sounds like terrible, but it really does. I do think that the 73 version is interesting to watch just from a, if you're into Romero and you kind of want to, you're interested in his films, I think it's a cool thing to watch from that perspective. But it's definitely, I understand why people say it's his weakest.
Yeah. Yeah. It just feels so chaotic,
Yeah.
honestly, to watch. And maybe that is why Breck Eisner or the producers of the 2010 version chose it. They were like, well, we cannot possibly fail to surpass the first film, and this will be a remake that people will say, "Huh, usually remakes are not as good as the original. In this case, it is better."
Right. Well, also, you take the name Romero at this time, 2010, zombie stuff's crazy. This probably was a lot cheaper to buy in terms of the stuff that he had to offer. And Dawn of the Dead was super popular. So maybe that's what they decided to do. But yeah, no, I think they did a good job. I think this is a fun watch. I'm glad I watched it again. But yeah, I don't think I'll be watching the 73 version again anytime soon.
No need.
No need at all. So yeah. Well, so this was a fun thing to record for our 50th episode. Woohoo.
Mm-hmm.
So, what would you like to talk about next week?
Well, I think next week, as we kind of teased last time, we need to, well, visit in my case, revisit for you, Return of the Living Dead from 1985. I think it's
Yes. Although,
85.
yeah, and when we say return for me, we mean return from. I feel like I had to sneak to watch this because my mom was really against me watching this. So I watched it at a neighbor's house.
Sneaky, sneaky.
Yep, and it gave me nightmares, and then I had to like lie to my mom about what I had been watching because it was, this was a thing people would like talk about on the playground.
Oh boy.
Have you seen this? And like, yeah. So I was pretty young when I watched it, so it'll feel like I watched it. I didn't watch it before, so it'll be all good.
All right. Well, that'll be our next review, the next podcast. So make sure you tune in next time on Reanimated when we talk about Return of the Living Dead. And until then, you can give us a holler on the emails at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com or on the tweets at reanimatedpcast. And
Woo!
then, yeah, so until next time, thank you for listening and rate us on iTunes and talk to you later.
Yeah, and have a good week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye bye.